Today we're going to be introducing ourselves to the Diary of Anne Frank. We're going to be reading it in class, but I wanted you guys to have a little bit of background information first. So we're going to start with a little bit of introductory material before we loop into the whole book. So we're going to start off with the historical background that surrounds this book because it's very important that you understand the context and things that were happening when Anne Frank wrote this diary. This book was written during World War II, which began in 1939 when Adolf Hitler's Germany invaded Poland. World War II involved the Allies and the Axis powers, and it was actually won by the Allies in 1947. During the war, one of our world's history's worst genocides, known as the Holocaust, was committed by Germany. We'll cover a little bit more on that in the next slide. And Adolf Hitler blamed the Jewish people in Europe for Germany's financial hardships after World War I. Germany was a suffering country and their economy was collapsing, and Adolf Hitler created a political platform in which he blamed Jewish people for what was going on in their country and wanted to eliminate them from the earth. So more on the Holocaust, which is the event that centers Anne's story. During the Holocaust, more than 6 million Jewish people were killed, and many were forced into hiding to avoid the horrific conditions of Hitler's concentration camps. Anne Frank and her family was one of those groups of people who was forced into hiding. Jews and some of Hitler's other political enemies were rounded up and shipped to these camps on crowded train cars and forced to do hard labor under horrible conditions. A lot of times, many people died not from direct murder, but from starvation and overworking and dying as a result of exposure to the elements. And illness was a big thing also. Some were even executed by German officers or forced into gas chambers, and most of the time, this was when they were not able to work and they were too old or too frail. So now let's talk about Anne, who's not only our main character, but also our author. She was born to Otto and Edith Frank on June 12, 1929. She is famous because her diary was published by her father after her death in Bergen-Belsen concentration camp in 1945. She and her family hid in a secret annex in her father's business in order to avoid being caught and captured by Nazi soldiers. And this is the story you guys will read about in Anne Frank's diary. She talks about how she's feeling, what goes on in the annex, and what's going on the outside. So I figured we should really find out a lot more about what her world looked like, since a lot of times it's hard to visualize something that we haven't experienced ourselves living here in the United States, not during World War II. So we're going to look at a Google Earth Lit quest that's going to show us what her world looked like, and it's going to show you a lot of settings of the story so that you can actually get a visualization better of what Anne was going through and what her family was going through. So this is Google Earth, and this is our great big Earth, but we've got to narrow it down somewhat. So we're going to start with Anne Frank's house. As you can see, this lit quest contains some activities for you to do, and these will come into play a little bit later. So I'm just going to show you this. This is the actual building where Anne Frank lived. She lived right around here on the second floor, and the activity with this image is actually a video of her looking out the window and waving, so you can actually see her coming out of this building. Obviously, it's been modernized as time has gone on. This is definitely not how it would have looked in the 1930s and 40s, but this is the exact building where Anne Frank lived. The next thing we're going to look at is the secret annex that Anne and her family lived in while they were hiding from the Nazis. This activity is really interesting because it lets you explore the secret annex in a virtual tour. And this is because a lot of the time you can't see the secret annex from the street, but it was in this building right here. Let's zoom in just a little bit to get some perspective. So from the street, you cannot see the annex, and that's why it was such a valuable hiding place, but it was actually hidden in a secret hallway in one of these buildings, and that's where Anne and her family hid for an incredibly long time before finally being caught by the Nazis and taken to Westerbork transit camp and that's the image that we're going to look at next. As you can see, this is a far journey that Anne and her family had to take on a crowded cattle car to Westerbork Transit Camp, and this is where Anne stayed for a little while before being transferred eventually. So let's zoom in a little bit on this. As you can see, it's kind of out in the middle of nowhere, lots of trees and fields, and although a lot of it has been destroyed now after World War II, this is where a lot of the housing would have been and where the working camps would have been also. So this is where Anne was transported first with her family. Next, we're going to look at Auschwitz concentration camp, which is where Anne and her family were transferred on September 3rd in 1944. And this is also where Anne's mother died. She was also separated with her sister Margot from the rest of her family. So Anne's father and mother stayed here, her mother eventually passing away, and her father eventually being liberated from so close to death at the end of the war. So there's actually a memorial here now to the victims who were horrifically killed in Auschwitz concentration camp, which was known as one of the most vile and disgusting camps that there were. A lot of the deaths were centered here in Auschwitz. However, Anne's story does not end here. It ends at Bergen-Belsen, which is where there is a memorial to both Margot, Anne's sister, and Anne herself. And this is the last camp that she was ever located in. As you can see, it's now been completely demolished, but this is where it would have been, out in the middle of nowhere, so that a lot of normal Germans couldn't see the horrific things that were going on under Hitler's regime. So I hope you appreciated looking at some of the settings, and I hope for your assignment you'll enjoy exploring them yourselves. What I'd like you guys to do is to go through this tour and look at the sites and really explore, really try to look at it through the eyes of Anne and her family. And there's an activity with every area. So for example, at Anne Frank's house, you can watch a video of Anne waving out a window, the only known video of Anne ever taken. At Westerbork, you can look at the memorial and learn more about their journey there. At the Secret Annex, you can take a virtual tour of where they lived. I'd really recommend that. So for your assignment, what I'd like you to do is one of the activities, just one, involved with any of these places that are on our tour. And I'd like you to write just a really short snippet, nothing too long, nothing too lengthy, just about a paragraph or two about how it made you feel and how you experienced that. And tomorrow in class, we'll use those as a basis for class discussion as we talk about the importance of setting in this book, and we talk about how we feel about Anne Frank's diary even before reading it. So I hope you guys enjoy working with that assignment and have a good rest of your day.